What's up, guys? Hope you're all having a great day today so far. Today we're going to be working on the 2JZ E36. If you saw the last episode, you'll know that we got the car running and driving. However, the engine's breaking up really bad. It won't accelerate at all. It's just not running right whatsoever. So we're going to have to start troubleshooting why that could be. There's hundreds of different reasons why it might not be running correctly. So without just throwing parts at it, the first thing we can do is try to pull codes off the ECU and see what it sees. So this is using a JDM Aristo VVTi ECU, which means it was only ever offered in Japan. There's no US support for it, which makes connecting to it with OBD2 a little bit tricky, but it is possible. So basically you got to get yourself an OBD2 port. And then there's one wire in the ECU that you need to connect to that OBD2 port, and then you need to give it power and a couple grounds. In case you're wondering, that port is this SIL port on the F60 plug. And if you need to figure out where that is, it's not, you can't see it on my printout here, but if you go to the Wilbo 666 wiring guide, you can find it there. So I've gone ahead and wired up a port that I stole out of another car, and then I have a Bluetooth scanner here, and that's very important. You can't do this with just a regular OBD2 scanner. It doesn't have the protocols for the JDM ECU. However, if you use a Bluetooth one, you can download an app called Torque Pro, and it's Android only. So I had to pull out one of my old Androids and get it all updated and then download it on there. But once you have that, there's some special text that you can enter in there. If you guys need that info, feel free to message me or just do a Google search on 2JZ VVTi OBD2 connection. You should find it pretty easily. There's a whole write-up about it. But once you've got that special text entered into there, then you can connect to the ECU. So let's go ahead and give that a shot and see what kind of codes we pull. So I've got mine wired up to only work when the ignition's on so it doesn't drain the battery. So we'll go ahead and turn the ignition on. And then we'll let this thing boot up. And then we'll go into our Torque Pro app. And now that the car symbol stopped flashing, we know we're connected. So we can go ahead and go to fault codes. And we gotta go up here and go to refresh. Now it'll search for the codes. It's going to take it a minute. But out of all the codes that I've pulled on it, most of them are for the automatic transmission. Obviously, I don't have one of those, so there's a whole bunch of codes for that. But there's 3 other codes that are not transmission related. We've got a TPS circuit A fault, and then we have a magnetic clutch for the throttle body, since I don't have the electronic throttle body. And then the third one is the turbo pressure, or basically the map sensor, which I don't have that either. So those 2 are expected, but the TPS, that one I'm not sure, and that could be an issue. The TPS is wired up. I've triple checked the wiring. It seems to be correct, but we're still getting that code. So there may be a short in it. I did split the TPS signal to also go to the accelerator signal on the ECU, so that could be a problem. But we're gonna start there and see if that makes any difference. But really, none of these codes that I'm getting, I would think would make the car idle as poorly as it is. So I'm not really confident that any of those codes are going to be the actual problem, but I wanna at least try to eliminate some of those first and then go from there. So the first thing I want to do is check the continuity of all the wires on the TPS. Basically, that means is the wire complete from here to the ECU, or is there a break in it somewhere? And we can easily do that with a multimeter. If we set it to this noise mode, then whenever you touch something that is a complete circuit, it'll beep like that. So now I should put one wire on one of these pins and the other one on the corresponding wire of the ECU, and I should get a beep. If not, then that wire's not making a complete circuit, meaning it's broken somewhere. So I'm gonna test those out real quick and we'll see what kind of results I get. Alright guys, so I ended up going deep down the rabbit hole there. I went to test the TPS. I tested all 4 wires. They had continuity. There were no breaks. Everything was good there. So like I said, I had the TPS signals split off into the accelerator position signals as well, because I was afraid I would get a limp mode if I didn't have that connected to anything. So I went and disconnected those from there and left the TPS connected to see if that would clear that TPS fault. And then all of a sudden the car wouldn't start, would not start at all. So I really thought I fried the ECU messing with the wires because I had left the battery connected. So then I spent like a whole day just trying to get the car to start again. Took out the spark plugs, cleaned them, did this, that, and the other. And it ended up just being that I had flooded it. And I don't know, it just didn't want to start that night. So I waited a whole day after cleaning the spark plugs, and then it fired right up the next day. So then I was back to square one. So I did a few things. I was worried that maybe I didn't have good enough grounds on the engine. You know, I have a ground from the frame rail to the block, but I don't have anything to the intake or to the head necessarily. And the other thing was, it seemed like I was getting a weak spark. Well, I know I was getting a weak spark when the spark plugs were dirty. So I grounded I got a good ground going to the igniter as well, and the grounds to the intake, and a ground to the head. And none of those made a difference whatsoever. Same exact results. Car was running super rich, and it just wasn't right. So after that, I completely bypassed the fuel pressure regulator. I threw on this old factory fuel rail that I had, just to rule that out as a problem, since I've welded AN fittings onto this fuel rail. So I had bypassed the regulator and ran straight into the rail with no return, just the factory setup. Still made no difference whatsoever. So I tried testing the injectors, but I don't really have a good way to test those, so I didn't get much information from there. But I'm like, this thing's running super rich. I know it's getting fuel. Maybe an injector stuck open, but I don't think so, because when you pull it out, and when I primed the system, no fuel would leak out of the injectors. So then I just sat and thought about it for a minute, and I did a whole bunch of research. I'm looking through forums and trying to figure out information, which is really hard on the VVTi engines, since they were JDM only. They're not as popular with swaps, or at least there's not as much information on them out there, because anytime somebody posts in a forum about the VVTi, everyone just assumes they're talking about non-VVTi. So you get all this mixed information that's not correct for the VVTi. Anyways, long story short, I was thinking about, why would the engine be running rich? So basically, the VVTi, the only way that it knows to adjust fuel is through the MAF sensor and through the O2 sensor, and a little bit through the TPS and maybe the speed sensor. They adjust it slightly. But the biggest thing is the MAF and the O2. So I wanted to test the MAF and make 100% certain that it was working correctly. You know, I had swapped in the new one. It seemed to be working, but I wanted to just go ahead and double check that again. And I think that's where my problem was. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure that's where the problem was. So I figured out I had wired the MAF backwards, and I'll show you why I made that mistake. So if you saw my wiring video, you'll know that I emphasized the fact that all these connectors, these pictures, are from the back side of the connector. So if you look at this connector, like B1, it matches the back side of B1 right there. So then naturally, I assumed that the wiring for the MAF would be the same way, and that the picture of the pinout would be from the back of the connector. And you can't actually see it on here. You'd have to go to the website, so you can scroll this over. It's actually over here somewhere. But you can see all of these connectors here. And the way I figured it out was by looking at one of the ECU connectors here. From here, you can tell that these are the front of the connectors. And actually, if you look at the MAF plugin, this little hole over here on the far side is bigger than this one on this side. So if you look at the picture of this pinout, it looks exactly like this, except it shows this little guy down here, which makes you think it's the back, because you can only see that when you're looking at it from the back. However, the picture is from the front. So I had all my wires backwards, and actually I thought that I had, because there's two different MAF wiring layouts, so I thought I had the newer style when actually I have the older style, so I had to rewire it according to that. and I had to know that this is pin 1 and this is pin 5. And actually, if you have the factory connector, you can see these tiny little numbers down here at the bottom. There's a 1, and over here on this side is a 5. So, as soon as I rewired that, now when I start it up, we get a way smoother idle. However, it is backfiring a little bit. And as you can see, now we're max lean instead of rich. But if you rev it up, it richens up some. So now that I've got that figured out, it should be much easier to get the car running the way it's supposed to. Now, there's a lot of different reasons it could be running lean. One being my exhaust is not finished. The O2 sensor is basically just tacked on there, so there's massive leaks around the O2 sensor. And then the other thing is I still need to do a boost leak test to make sure I'm not losing any boost, or that I don't have any vacuum leaks or anything like that. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna get the exhaust finished, get that knocked out, and see if that makes much of a difference. And we'll make sure we do a boost leak check as well. But first things first, time to get this exhaust done. Okay, so we got the exhaust done. I didn't bother filming it. It's pretty simple. It's just a straight pipe basically. It definitely turned out a lot lower than I had hoped. You can see up there the V-band is only about 2 inches off the ground. So that's definitely not good. So I'm definitely gonna have to redo it at some point, but this was my first ever full exhaust build using V-bands and everything. So there's a few things I learned from it. One, I should have put the V-band up closer to the firewall and then had it go down and out. That way the V-band wouldn't be under the car, because that'd give you another inch of clearance there. And then the other thing that I didn't realize until after the fact is the O2 sensors and wideband. You're supposed to mount those on top of the exhaust so that moisture can't collect in the sensor and ruin them. So I've got mine on the bottom side. It'll work for now, but I'm definitely gonna wanna redo that at some point when I have more time. And I'm missing the trim for my bumper that goes on that lower part. But once I have that on, you should barely be able to see the exhaust tip. It shouldn't stick past it much at all, which was my goal, because with a drift car, you're constantly scraping the rear end on walls and things like that. So you really don't want the exhaust sticking out where it's gonna catch and potentially rip it off or break the exhaust. But it'll work for now. So now that the exhaust is done, we can take it for another test drive and see if it's any better now. All right, guys, so I'm sure this video has just been all over the place, and I apologize for that, but that's just kind of how things are when you have a fresh build like this. You know, there's a lot of bugs that have to be worked out, and sometimes you just kind of have to bounce around going from one thing to the next trying to figure out what the problem is. So now obviously the biggest problem was the MAF being wired backwards, causing it to run super rich. But as soon as I figured that out and got that fixed, then all of a sudden it was doing the complete opposite, where it was just max lean on the AFRs. And nothing I did seemed to make that change. It would just stay at max, even when I test drove it, just max lean all the time. I double, triple checked all my electronics, the TPS, everything else. And with the app on the phone with the OBD2 scanner, it has a lot of great tools that you can use, like MAF voltage, TPS voltage, O2 sensor voltage. You can see all of that stuff and you can monitor it while the car's running. So I was able to confirm that all of that stuff was working. So then the next thing I did was test for vacuum leaks. So I made this little ghetto fancy contraption here. It's just a piece of aluminum tubing that's capped off and then has a valve stem on it. So you could stick this on the turbo or in the intercooler piping, whatever you want to, clamp it on. And then you can use a gauge like this or an air gun like this with a gauge. That way you can fill up the system, because you don't want to pressurize it more than like 5 to 7, maybe 10 psi max. Any more than that, and you can blow out seals or damage engine components. So you want to make sure you're monitoring how much air you're putting in it. So you fill the system, and if it holds pressure, or at least holds it pretty well, then you don't have any leaks. You might be leaking into the exhaust through one of the intake valves if one of the intake valves is open, but if you do have leaks, you can hear them. Typically, you can hear where the leaks are coming from, and then you can pinpoint them, whether you use your fingers to feel for them or you spray soapy water on it. Whatever you have to do to figure out where those leaks are. So I found one little pinhole in the intercooler piping on one of my welds, so I fixed that. And then this throttle body was terrible. I tried making a gasket for it with some just generic gasket material from Felpro, I think, and it was leaking, so we took it off. We put RTV on it, put it back on. It was still leaking because one of the bolts was stripped, so I took it off again. I drilled and tapped all of the bolts to a bigger size and got more thread engagement, so I drilled the holes deeper, and then put RTV on it, put it all back together, and no more leaks there. And then the other thing was the turbo outlet. So if you guys remember from earlier videos, this turbo just had a straight outlet, and then I had a 90-degree silicone coupler that was kind of janky, and you couldn't get it on all the way, and then you couldn't get the V-band on all the way because of the oil line. So I got a weld-on aluminum 90-degree and got that welded on. Turned out really nice. And that gave me a ton more room for my oil line, so I was actually able to put some heat sleeving over the oil line. I had some vacuum leaks on the fuel pressure regulator. I put some thread sealant on the threads on that and put that back together. We fixed that problem. So once all of the vacuum leaks were eliminated, the engine ran a lot smoother, sounds really good, but I was still getting max lean on the wideband gauge. So I actually switched the MAF back to the backwards wiring, and I knew that when it was wired like that, it was like super rich. So I started it up with it wired backwards and still went to max lean. So then I'm like, okay, pretty sure there's a problem with the AFR gauge. So to test that, you can pull the sensor out of the exhaust, leave it connected to the car, and take a paper towel or a rag and soak it in some gasoline or some starting fluid, and then wrap it around the O2 sensor for the wideband, and then turn the key on. Once you turn the key on and the wideband comes on, it should go to rich. You know, it starts at 14.7 because that's stoic, you know, atmospheric AFRs. It should go from there and get richer, like to, you know, 13, 12, whatever. It should go down. Instead, mine was going straight up to max lean again, even completely wrapped up with starting fluid. So that was a big indicator right there that the AFR gauge was bad. Well, not the gauge, but the sensor. So I ordered a new sensor on Amazon. You can order just a sensor. It's just a standard Bosch LSU 4.9, I think it is. Just a basic sensor for wideband. Ordered a new one of those, installed it, turned the car on, and now it's idling at like 12 to 13 AFRs, which is perfect. You know, the ECU still has to learn and adjust, but way better than it was before. So let's start it up so you guys can hear what it sounds like now. So as you can see, it's running super smooth. You can definitely notice that there's no idle air control valve on it. Kind of have to rev it up and get it just a little bit warmer before it'll idle. But other than that, it's running way smoother. So as it warms up, you can see the AFRs are getting higher to where we want them, like in the 14 to 15 range. That's typically what you want at idle. So yeah, I think we're ready to test drive this thing now and see if it's any better this time.
It'll be alright. Will it? Oh, God. Probably chill a little bit. It's probably way too much boost for it. If you're hitting too much boost, would that be pushing it in the hood?
should, because I don't have a map sensor. There's the ECU shouldn't be measuring boost. Oh God, something's not right. I think I broke something in the back end. I might have broken an axle. Because it's pulling when I... Oh yeah, I think I broke a fucking axle.
Yeah, I heard it. Drag.
What the fuck?
Something drag.
Well, looks like we're gonna need new axles. I have spares, but I thought these axles would be able to take it. Might have to upgrade to like M3 axles or something. That's interesting. Yep, just like I thought, we broke an axle. First time I've ever broken an axle on this car. Alright, so overall, I would definitely call that test drive a success. The car freaking rips. It sounds amazing. It seems fast. It's hard to tell because we can't fully get on it, but as it's accelerating, you can tell that it's pulling. So I'm really excited. I feel like we're this close to being ready to go to a drift event with it. I need to figure out why it seems like it's going into limp mode maybe, or it's just acting funny. Something's happening once you get higher up in the RPMs. Almost like maybe when the wastegate opens, it's doing something funny. I know it's not necessarily an RPM cut because I could tell I hit rev limiter once, so it's not that. But obviously I need to fix the axle first, get that swapped out, hope that I don't break another one, and then do some more test driving and see if we can figure out the issue. So, but either way, we're leaps and bounds further than we were a couple weeks ago. So I'm really happy about that. There was a moment there where I was this close to giving up because I just couldn't figure out these issues and I couldn't get very much information, and it was definitely a struggle, but I powered through, figured it out. It's one of those things where, you know, I would come to the shop and I would spend maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I'd try a couple things, they didn't work, so then I would just go home and I would just think about it. I would do research and just try to figure out the problem. You know, sometimes you just have to go home for the day and come back the next day, and you know, as you think about it overnight, you come up with ideas, and then you come back and try them the next day. So I guess the moral of the story is never give up. If I can do it, you guys can do it too. And I know a lot of you are. Several of you have commented on your builds and what you're doing, and I love seeing that stuff. So if you guys are building a car like this, throw it down in the comments, especially if it's a swap. If you're putting a 2J in a truck or something, I want to hear about it because that's awesome. But I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. This video is probably not very long, but it was all over the place. But we did get a lot done. A lot of troubleshooting took place in the background. I didn't want to bore you guys with that, but we made huge progress. So now I might test drive it one more time after fixing the axle and see if we can't figure out that other issue. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff left to do, getting the doors and fenders and hood on and all that. We still have to loom the wiring harness, fix the instrument cluster that kept falling out when we were test driving. But you know, it's just a lot of little things from here. So that being said, I hope to see you guys on the next one, and peace out.